Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is Edward Jeredjian, who is a former U.S. ambassador to Syria, ambassador to Israel, and a former Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs. And he's currently the director of the James Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University in Houston, Texas. Welcome to the France 24.
My pleasure to be with you.
Interview. 20 years ago, you made a speech, and everybody remembers that speech, where you said that instead of one man, one vote, Islamists wanted one person, one vote, one time, meaning that they wanted democracy to get to power, but then they didn't want it anymore. Correct. How current is that today?
Well, it does seem to be very current, because at that time, when I gave that speech, the Meridian House speech in 1992, what I noted was that there was a tendency in the United States at that time, in academic circles and political circles, to look, who is the new enemy after the fall of communism? What is the next ism? And I was very concerned about certain schools of thought that said Islam is the next enemy. And I thought, how can a civilization and a culture and a religion become identified as an enemy a priori? And so I made this speech, and the basic themes of that speech, very simply put, were that the next ism that the United States is going to have to confront in the Middle East is obviously no longer communism or any other, but extremism and terrorism of either a secular or a religious cloak. But I also said that elections can be used to monopolize power, and therefore I made this statement that while the United States is for, I used one person, one vote, one time in the speech. It was translated immediately in the Arab world as one man, one vote, one time. It was taken as a direct signal to the Algerian Islamic Salvation Front, which was on the cusp of winning the elections in Algeria and coming into power. And so what I expressed was that we are suspect of those groups that use the democratic process in elections to come to power, and then once in power, disassemble that democratic process to remain in power. And that remains a challenge today in the aftermath of the Arab awakening or the Arab Spring.
So let's fast forward to now. Egypt is obviously in turmoil. There are tensions in Tunisia, in Libya. Do you think that this is really reality showing that this democratic test is now really being passed or not by the Islamist parties?
Yes, this is one of the challenges. The challenge of the Islamic parties in the countries you mentioned is really not that they've come to power. Let's be intellectually honest. When there are free elections in the Muslim world, Islamic political organizations are going to compete for political positions, and at times they're going to win. So it's not the event of their coming into power, but the key challenge is, how do they govern? Do they govern democratically? For example, in the next elections, if they lose at the ballot box, are they prepared to step down peacefully, like in all other democratic countries? Or will they try to manipulate the system to stay in power?
What's your take for now?
We don't know.
From what you're seeing, let's take Egypt, for instance.
Well, I think that President Morsi has basically raised his suspicion by his recent executive decrees against the Egyptian judiciary, and in terms of fast-forwarding a process in which his party is dominant in the Constituent Assembly that is writing the Egyptian constitution. So is this an indication, and many are interpreting it, as an effort for him to monopolize power? It's not a very positive sign. It's not a very positive sign. So to answer your question, it's premature to come to a conclusion. But elections alone do not make democracy. Elections are a very vibrant instrument, as we all know, to democracy. But I remember when, I love to give this anecdote, when I was the United States ambassador to Syria, then President Hafez al-Assad, the father of the current president, had just won another presidential election for a 6-year term. And I was having a meeting with him a week after the election, and he had won by 99.44% of the vote. And I said, you know, Mr. President, there are American politicians who would die to have these types of numbers. And he sort of smiled, and I said, may I ask you a question? Do you know who the 0.56% are who did not vote for you? And without any hesitation, he looked at me and he said, Ambassador Georgian, don't worry, I have all their names. And that to me is such an anecdote about how elections alone can be manipulated by secular or Islamist leaders. So the point here is, how do the Islamist parties govern? And one Arab friend of mine told me, he said, you know, you cannot govern by inshallah alone. You can't say, you cannot address the jobs issue, or the education issues, or the social justice issues, or the infrastructure issues, the economy, by inshallah alone, if God wills. You have to have pragmatic policies to address all the issues that the Hosni Mubaraks had to face, the President Ben Ali's had to face, that helped overturn those regimes. So the jury is out. The jury is out.
Syria, you were ambassador there some 20 years ago. You've met, I think, Bashar al-Assad nearly a decade ago. I read recently you said it is a crisis from hell.
Yes, it is a crisis from hell. It's very painful to see what is happening in Syria because it is such a rich, multi-confessional society of Muslims and Christians, Druze, Alawites. It's an ethnic mosaic that has been living in multi-confessional harmony for centuries, certainly under the Ottoman Empire and beyond in independence. And to see this very rich society at the heart of the Arab world on the cusp of a major sectarian war, because already sectarian violence is taking place. But to see this country on the cusp of disintegration is a human tragedy, it's a political tragedy, and if Syria implodes, it will have a major impact on its very important neighbors, Turkey to the north, Lebanon to the west, Iraq to the east, Jordan, Israel to the south. So we are definitely in a post-Assad era. There's no question in my mind that we will be in a post-Assad era. Exactly when this regime falls, no one has been able to predict with any precision. But the challenge is, what replaces this regime? Will that regime that comes to power respect the multi-confessional character of Syria and rule, in Middle Eastern terms, democratically? That is the challenge. Or will some other autocrat or dictatorial regime, either secular or religious, come into power, and we're sort of back to square one? So these are the challenges.
Last issue, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It seems to be going nowhere in terms of negotiations. We've seen Hamas come out strong after the recent flare-up in Gaza with its leader Khaled Meshal going there, several regional leaders. How do you see the situation evolving?
Well, I think the key objective, in my mind, has to be to get to direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians on a two-state solution. This is critical. And I think there is a general consensus that this is the only way out. But the political leaders have failed, tragically failed, to achieve a negotiating track. And I hope that after the re-election of President Obama in Washington, that my country, that Washington, will take a much more active role in trying to do what seems to be impossible, getting an Israeli-Palestinian agreement. It is not impossible. An agreement between the Israelis and Palestinians has been worked on for decades. And even recently, we did a report that shows that a territorial compromise can be reached.
But Obama, when he arrived at the White House 4 years ago, said, I will try. He tried, he failed. Why would he want to try again, given that precedent?
He was absolutely right on bringing it as one of his priorities of his administration. He was absolutely right in choosing a skilled negotiator like George Mitchell to be his envoy immediately. He was absolutely right when he stated that Israeli settlements are illegal. But then the pressure came, and the opposition came to any initiative led by Washington, and he stepped back.
Why would it be different this time?
Because now he has politically, it's his second term, he cannot be reelected. If this remains a priority for him, then he can try to do it. If you look at the history of successful Arab-Israeli negotiations, some have been done directly, like the Israeli-Jordanian agreement was done between King Hussein and Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. But in the disengagement agreements after the Yom Kippur War in '73, Nixon and Kissinger played a key role. When I was in government with President Bush 41, the father Bush, and Secretary of State James Baker, our team, we created the Madrid Peace Conference. For the first time in history, we got the Israelis under a Likud prime minister, Yitzhak Shamir, together with all their Arab neighbors. And that Madrid framework still remains the framework for ongoing negotiations, land for peace. And then earlier than that, Jimmy Carter with Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. Bill Clinton tried, ran out of time. What I'm saying is that when an American president has the political will, the courage, and the determination, the chances for an Israeli-Palestinian agreement are enhanced. I hope that will happen.
Okay. Ambassador Jaredjian, thank you very much for answering our questions. Thank you very much for watching this edition of the interview here on France 24.